leadership crisis is upon us. The issue at hand really is how do we understand where we are at as Africans, from the errors that we have committed on our own watch, the mistakes that we made, and indeed the strides we have made. We have come a very, very long way. Last night he endorsed our own conviction that Namibia is one of the better countries on the African continent with the peace and stability that we enjoy. But we must not take that for granted. It can go pear-shaped anytime. We are very, very grateful, my brother, for coming here. The ideas that you expound are organic to us. The restlessness that you exhibit is with us. The confidence you share must be spread across the African continent, and particularly to the youth. You are not a guest here. Ambassador Isaac will tell you that we are part of the fabric of one of us. Remember, Nyerere used to teach that in Africa we don't have foreigners. There is no word in our Bantu languages, if you will, for foreigners. A guest is a guest in Africa only for 2 days. When he stays third day, that person is a member of the family. Give him an instrument to go and work the soil to produce food. And if he or she came with children, send those children to go and bring the cows back home. Ladies and gentlemen, let us take it out. Let us make love of them.
Want to retain a man in a foreign land, you give him two things: a wife and land. Then he'll never leave. But my wife would have something to say about it. So thank you very much. Let me say how glad I am to have received the invitation to be present with you this morning and this day. This is my maiden visit to Namibia, but I know quite a bit about Namibia and her struggle for independence. I remember as a young high school student, one of the courses which I took was African national movements. And one of the movements that was our focus of study was SWAPO. And I'm familiar with the activities of your first president, Sam Yoma, and other great stalwarts like Andimba, Haman Toivo, Ya Toivo. I therefore come to a land that I'm familiar with. I come to a land which in the last few years, having gained our political independence, is moving in the right direction. But like many African countries, continue to punch below her economic and political weight. During our conversation last evening, I suggested to my colleagues that Namibia is one of the few African countries which, in my view, should have 100% employment. She has the size, she has the right population, she has the resources, and there is no reason why she should not be like Denmark in Europe, like Finland, Norway, Sweden, or Qatar. But I'm told that that is work in progress. So today, when I come here to share my thoughts with you, it is proper to say, even if I repeat it, that like Paul in the Bible, I did not learn under the feet of Gamaliel, nor am I going to say anything new. But the old wisdom says, remind them even if they know. The old wisdom says that the value of a visitor is that he is capable of seeing the cobwebs which you long thought were part of your furniture. And that is the role that perhaps I'm going to play when I talk about Africa. I've written a paper which is more disciplined than the style that I'll use to speak. And you'll have occasion to read my more disciplined thoughts in that paper, which is titled, Africa, Unleash Thy Potential. Africa today, for those of you who are lovers of statistics, give or take, we have a population of nearly 1.2 billion. Just about the same population as India. We, all the 54 African countries combined, perhaps our GDP is something in the neighborhood of $2 trillion United States dollars. Just about the GDP of Brazil or Russia. We have the youngest population in the world. And there is a sense, therefore, in which Africa has many possibilities. But the truth be told, Africa still lags behind in all sectors. Economic romanticists will tell you, as they normally do, that we have some of the fastest growing economies in the world. And statistically, they may be right that Angola is growing at 7%. They may be right that Equatorial Guinea is growing at 7%. They may be right that Ethiopia is growing at 9%. But the question is, that kind of growth, what impact does it have on the quality of the lives of the people of those countries? That is not to say that that is not to be celebrated. I hold the view that we must celebrate the little things that we do, the little achievements that we make. But when those achievements do not impact positively on the quality of our lives, we must celebrate, but remind ourselves that our agenda is to lift the critical mass of our people from the quicksands of underdevelopment to the hard ground of true growth and development, where the quality of their lives changes. We must ask ourselves many questions as a continent. Why is it to Europe and Australia? Why is it that we of the middle class, in our unguarded moments, if we can, when our wives are expectant, we wish to send them for holidays in the United States, that they may be delivered there, so that their children are citizens of the United States of America. We must ask ourselves, why is it with those statistics that all of us, or most of us, still engage in the lottery of winning the green card? Why is it that when we are unwell, unless we do not have the economic wherewithal, we run away to India, seek treatment? to the United States of America to seek treatment, and for you in Namibia to South Africa, in institutions, whether you like it or not, that were created by the white population there. These are questions that are uncomfortable, but we must ask them, because we have been too nice to each other for too long, because we do not want to offend each other. So today, when we are assembled here, we must ask ourselves, what is the problem? And just as the good professor said, I've read and reread the speeches delivered between the 23rd and 25th days of May in 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, by the 32 heads of states and government that sat there. The clarity with which they thought at that time is as astounding as it is amazing. They were able to see that the long-term health of our continent not only required but demanded that we must ask ourselves certain foundational questions. Having attained our political independence, if it was not Kwame Nkrumah posing the question, it was Nyerere posing the question, how will we feed our population? Today, many African countries are incapable of feeding their populations. The divine instruction was, go ye and subdue the world. The world has subdued us. We cannot feed ourselves. We cannot produce enough maize. A country like Zimbabwe, which when I was a university student was the bread basket of the southern region. Today, Zimbabwe has distinguished herself in the most negative way. The first country in the recent past not to have a currency of its own. Sometimes they experiment with the dollar, sometimes with the yuan, sometimes with something called the bond. They have no currency. That is not to say that there was not a problem. I've always said that land is the last colonial question which must be resolved. But how do you resolve it? Zimbabwe is just one country. Nigeria, which ought to be a great country with a population of nearly 250 million, only has a GDP of slightly over 500 billion United States dollars, a country that in my view should be a $5 trillion economy, continues to punch below our weight. When our president is unwell, the president seeks treatment in London, England. Statistical growth, when our president is sick, he seeks treatment in Madrid, in Spain. So that you have these health ministries in which you have no faith. That is the Africa that we are talking about. But I must remind myself that I was talking about the speeches in 1963. They talked about education. And they said that we must have quality education. Today, in many African countries where we enjoy literacy, we are the history books that we continually use. You know, many times when I read history books and I see the way we name things, you go to Victoria Falls, and the books still tell us that some white gentleman discovered the most Victoria Falls. And we believe that that is what happened. Some books people still tell us that Lake Victoria was discovered by Speke, and we still believe it. Carter G. Woodson was right. miseducation of the African is part of the African problem. So the question that we must ask ourselves, how are we going to re-educate ourselves? Because this is at the very heart of how we are going to harness our resources. The leaders spoke about education in 1963, and we went on a spree of construction of primary schools, of secondary schools, of universities, and we have things that are called schools and universities, complete with graduates, complete with PhDs and all. But what is their impact on our economy? We produce engineers, civil engineers, but the Chinese are building our roads. We produce doctors. Oh, but the Indians are treating us sick. We produce agriculture graduates, but the Israelites are teaching us dry land agriculture. When we can afford it, it is only those who can't afford it that will send their students to the University of Namibia. Otherwise, one is proud when they say, my student, my son or daughter is at Harvard, or Yale, or Kent, or some other universities. And if you are not doing so very well at the Wits, or Cape Town, or Rhodes, submitting to us that the battle must be fought in our minds and heart. Martin Luther King Jr. was right, the mind is the standard of the man. And that is where the battle must be fought. And in 1963 they could see this. Another African problem that they spoke about is the insatiable love of the African leaders for power for its own sake. When you look at Africa today, what undermines Africans and the African continent is the quest for power for its own sake. Julius Kambarage Nyerere said that when you are electing your leaders, you must avoid individuals who do not acquit themselves from what he called the 5 P's. Leaders who seek power for its own sake. Leaders who seek popularity for its own sake. Leaders who seek property for its own sake. Leaders who seek prestige for its own sake. And leaders who seek pomposity for its own sake. Have you ever wondered that the longest motorcades in the world are to be found in the poorest countries in the world? It used to be said of Mobutu Sese Seko in his heyday that his motorcade was as long as a mile, complete with witch doctors. When you have Africa characterized in that way, then you have a problem of leadership. That is why in an African setting, elections are a matter of life and death. African leaders never lose elections. They are only rigged. In Angola recently, the fellows lost elections clearly. Oh, they were rigged. Everywhere you go, they were rigged. It is only recently in Ghana that we had the gracious departure of President Mahama, and in Nigeria the gracious departure of President Goodluck Jonathan. But those are the exceptions rather than the rule. The most tragic comic of all was in the Gambia, where the president says, I lost the election. But a revelation came to him. A few days later, he said, I never lost the election. I thought I lost the election. But I've now discovered that I never lost them. That is Africa for you. And if you are to demonstrate or to understand that the manner in which you handle leadership is at the very heart of how we handle resources. See the recent events in the world. On a mere accusation of involvement in corruption, the Brazilian president Dilma Rousseff leaves office. The South Korean president is now facing charges. The Thai prime minister is about to be convicted. In other words, the law works. In Africa, we have all the laws we need except the single law that says we obey all the other laws. This is the tragedy of Africa. The net effect of all these, as Chinua Achebe of Nigeria said, the problem of Africa is simply and squarely a problem of leadership. That is our problem. The day we solve the problem of leadership and we recognize that leadership is the fountain from which all things flow, we are not going to realize our potential. And all the resources that we are talking about are not going to do us any good. I'm still back in 1963, and they were speaking about this. Everybody spoke, but Kwame Nkrumah captured it. He said, we must not leave here without a single currency. We must not live here without a single central bank. We must not live here without a single army with a united command. Oh, they did not listen to him. And we have paid the price and will continue to pay the price. Today, Africa has the resources. And Africa has always been attractive to the world throughout the ages because of our resources. The enterprise called slavery was informed by the realization that Africans themselves were a resource. The commodification of the African was informed by that unfortunate reality. We seldom talk about it, but the first people to enslave the Africans were the Arabs. Castrating all of them, that is why you never see many Africans in that part of the world. Then Europe and America came and enslaved us. Then slavery lost its lust. Then colonization came. What Frantz Fanon calls the thingification of the African. That African became a thing. And no European power did not have its fair share of Africa. They sat in Berlin in 1884. The Germans had their peace here, they took it. They went to Dahomey and they took their peace there. We now call it Benin. They went to Tanganyika and they took it. The Germans had taken their share. The British had their share. They went to Nigeria and Ghana and Kenya and Zambia and Zimbabwe and they took their share. The Portuguese had their share. Little backward Portugal had their share in Angola, in Mozambique, in Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau. The Spaniards had a little sliver in the armpit of Africa in Equatorial Guinea. The French had their share. The Italians tried in Ethiopia. They never succeeded, but they were present in Libya. Africa was colonized. And it's always instructive to me. Tribal wars with the Christian, the World War. And when we were talking about freedom of the peoples, when the Americans were saying in the 18th century that all men are born equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain and unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, slavery was alive and well. In 1945, when they sat in San Francisco to come up with the UN Charter, colonialism was alive and well. When Hendrik Verwoerd was instituting the apartheid regime through the National Party in 1948, all these things were alive and well. Colonialism happened. In 1957, Ghana becomes independent, and Nkrumah once again says that the independence of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. You are some of the very last countries in Africa to regain their independence. The question is, therefore, which is legitimate today, beyond sorrows and lamentations of the past, we must be aware of the past, nevertheless, to see the future. But what have we done with our independence? This is the question. We have now been independent on average, many African countries, for 50 years. What have we done with it? How have we used our human resource? How have we used our natural resource? This is the question. Because we must stop lamenting and we must ask ourselves, what are we doing for our young men and women? And that is where we must indict ourselves. You know, now many African countries are competing in the manner that I've said about the resources of this and this, about the growth of many African countries, so that Namibia has a per capita income of 11,000 or 12,000 United States dollars. Therefore, Namibia is a middle-level economy. Those are statistical. Tell that to a Herero woman who cannot take her child to school. Tell that to a Shiwambo woman who cannot have a meal, that there is something called per capita, that it is 11,000 United States dollars, and that all Namibians are assumed to have that money in the market. That is voodoo economics. Time has come that we must do what they do in Bhutan. We have a gross national happiness index as the true test of the state of our economy. We are asking ourselves, many African countries, the Namibians will say, you are better than the South Sudanese. But it is, in many ways, the state of two dwarfs, debating which one is taller than the other. The truth is that they are still dwarfs. What we must do is to have hormones for economic growth. And those hormones will only happen if we ask ourselves what are the fundamental problems and what are the things that stand in the way of African growth. If you look at the resource map of Africa, God was very generous to us. Look at South Africa. Its very name, Johannesburg, Egoli, is a celebration of the gold that resides inside her belly. Look at this country, uranium. What you have. Look at the fishes that roam alongside or inside of the Walvis Bay, to which you have contributed nothing. They were deposited there from heaven on the day of creation, and they continue to reproduce without any effort on your part. And they are resident there. Look at the diamonds that you have. Go to to the Democratic Republic of Congo, that country that was given all the resources, every mobile phone you have has rare earth from Congo. And yet, paradoxically and ironically at once, is one of the poorest nations on earth. Look at Niger with uranium. Look at little Equatorial Guinea and Angola with oil. Look at Mozambique and Tanzania with natural gas. Look at Zambia with copper. Look at the Central African Republic and Niger and Burkina Faso with uranium. Look at Nigeria and Ghana with oil, cobalt, and all those resources. But when you look at the largest oil companies operating in Africa, it is Total of France. It is Elf of France. It is Shell. It is BP. A little injection from Angel, but just a little. In other words, we are not harnessing our resources. And I'm submitting to us that the divine instruction was, I repeat again, go and subdue the world. How is it that we have over the last 50 years produced geologists, and the Chinese must come here to tell us how to deal with our uranium? And we wonder, we are left wondering. And I'm not one who is against international trade, I'm for trade. But what is happening between us and China? Is it trade or raid? Because we must make a distinction between trade and raid. And I'm submitting to us that we have raiders and we have welcomed them. We must reverse the situation if Africa is to realize something, and I agree with him, that in the dinner table of human civilization and human development, there are three ways to be at the dinner table. You are either a diner or a waiter or food to be eaten. So choose how you will be present at the dinner table. And I'm submitting to us that Africa has only played two roles. At one time, she has been the food to be eaten, and at the best of times, as a waiter. We must reverse that position if Africa is to realize their potential. Today, Africa stands at crossroads. And she can only rescue herself if she realizes and determines which road she is going to take. And the road to be taken is the road that is untested. We must do what other civilizations have done. I've always argued, and I argue again, that Africa finds herself in a unique position in matters of human development and human civilization. That she can learn from others and therefore take a shorter route. Why? The Europeans have made enough mistakes. We can avoid the mistakes that they made. The Americans have made enough mistakes, and we can avoid the mistakes they made. Was it not Winston Churchill who said that success is moving from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm? If that is correct, therefore we must ask ourselves what it is that we can do. China, in our own lifetime, has lifted herself from poverty to prosperity. Vietnam has lifted herself from poverty and war into prosperity. Japan, bombed to the ground in 1945, did so in the lifetime of some of us. Germany, in 1945, bombed to the ground, lifted herself. And yet, when you visit Liberia, independent in 1847, not even a single street light in Monrovia, not even a single one. We still import chicken from Brazil, beef tea from Argentina, and even water from Coca-Cola called Darsani. One can go on and on, but I'm submitting to us that each one of us who is present in this room must begin to ask some fundamental questions. How do we go forward, therefore, in liberating Africa? You are the captains of industry. Africa looks to you. Africa is asking the nagging question, how shall we be 100 years from today? How are we going to solve our leadership problem? How are we going to create an environment where when we have an occasion to elect our leaders, it's not a life and death issue. It is simply an occasion for determining which sets of men and women are going to preside over our affairs in a selfless manner. Africa is asking, how shall we have leaders how shall we have leaders who are selfless and not those whose only agenda is to engage in primitive accumulation? Because one of the problems in Africa also is corruption. The African leaders' appetite for things is astounding and is amazing. You know, I cannot remember who, but he said that there are people so poor in the world that the only thing that they have is money. And there is no shortage of such individuals in Africa. You know, I was reading recently the former Nigerian Minister for Petroleum, who is now being indicted in Nigeria, being indicted in Italy, being indicted in the United Kingdom, being indicted in the United States of America. She's a woman. And you know, women are never quite that greedy. But this particular lady, don't allow me to call her a lady, I'm just being gracious. This lady called Madueke had 37 apartments in Nigeria. What do you do with it? What do you do with 37 apartments when you have rent from all of it? What do you do? Because when you settle at breakfast, you can't eat a cow. When you settle for lunch, you can't eat a rhino. When you settle for dinner, you can't eat an elephant. When you are driving, you can't drive a bus. When you are flying, you can't fly for shorter hours than we do to Europe. It is the same time. When you sleep on a bed, even if it is a bed of gold, if sleep will have long departed you, you need sleeping pills. So the question is, what those in positions of leadership, particularly of the political class, have you ever found out in Africa that when individuals are appointed to be ministers, and some of you may be government ministers or high-ranking government officials, when you are appointed to a ministry of energy, your relatives and friends come to congratulate you that you've been appointed into the lucrative ministry. And I've always wondered, how can it possibly be lucrative and you have a salary which is known? In other words, they are telling you, you have now been appointed to be a thief. And if you do not steal, they say you are stupid. That is only in Africa. That is only in Africa. In Europe and America, countries like Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Monaco are doing well. But the Congo does not even have money to hold elections. I'm therefore submitting to us that one of the things from which we must free our leaders is poverty of the mind and the heart and the soul. The African leadership's creed is greed. I do not know whether Namibia suffers such, but every African country that I know about suffers from this sickness. And you know, I've always asked myself, Why should I buy a house or own houses in places where I need visas to go? I can only own a house in a country where I have freedom of movement and entry. You know, it is said of Alexander the Great that when he died, and many of you will know this story, that he summoned all his 4 generals and said, when I die, I want it to be that you make a coffin and I'll be laid on my coffin with my arms outstretched, and all the wealth that I have should be sprinkled and the procession, and that my casket should be carried by doctors, and that my hands should be outstretched, that the world may know I came into the world empty-handed, and empty-handed I leave. I wish our greedy, thieving from that. Because if they don't, Africa is never going to realize our potential. The other thing from a long king by my hosts. Because a new system had been introduced that I would say I could talk about. New system doesn't work, but it will work, I know. But yesterday it didn't work efficiently, with the consequence that each traveler was spending nearly 15 minutes to be identified. How can you grow? How can you grow when to process 100 people you take half a day, which would have happened in 15 minutes at the airport in Thailand? How can you grow where I moved from Nairobi, Kenya, and flying for no more than 9 hours at the longest distance? I have the Kenyan shilling, the Angolan kwanza, the Rwandese franc, the Burundian franc, the Zambian kwacha, the Zimbabwean no money, the Mozambique metica, the South African rand, the Namibian dollar. It can't work. You have central banks, 54 central banks, where you need only one central bank. And those of you who are in business must know that those are the impediments. We must eliminate visas. If it is an avenue of revenue collection, let's have an entry fee. But let us bring down these artificial walls. You cannot grow. You may do all these things. You know, the laws of nature and physics will not change because Africa wants to grow. Africa must just do the things that ought to be done in the right way. And I'm submitting to us that you who are captains of industry must begin to do it. China. And I want to speak about China before I sit down. China. The Chinese are to be admired. I do not know how many of you have ever seen the Chinese when the Politburo meets every year. The discipline. Puritans from Western Europe will say it is not democratic. But who is to define democracy? Who is to tell a people how they are to be governed? Who is this whom God delegated the power to determine for other civilizations how to govern themselves? Who is this? Who is this who has arrogated to himself or to themselves the monopoly of wisdom? Is it Europe? Is it America? Or they have simply appointed themselves as the major domos of the world? The Chinese have a system, like it or not, moving with the grace and pace of the peacock and the tortoise at once. They are moving in some direction, and slowly by slowly they are gaining ground, making little noise, but creating great impact. Is there something to learn from China? There is. I was telling my colleagues here that 2 years ago they said that Chinese couples can now have the second child that second child will work in Africa. That second child will work in Europe, because that second child is being, and permit me to say, produced deliberately because China needs labor. Why does China need labor? Because China is building your stadia. China is constructing your railways. China is constructing your roads. China is constructing your factories. Meanwhile, there is massive unemployment in Namibia. A paradox. There is something to learn from China. China is receiving your uranium and converting it into something else and bringing it back. China is making your textile. China is making your equipment. China is the factory of the world. Can't Windhoek be the factory of the world? Can't the Kalahari Desert be the factory of the world? If the Qataris and the United Arab Emirates have converted a desert into something, can't the Kalahari be that place? Can't the Namib Desert be the receptacle for SADC and by extension Africa? Can it happen? Is it beyond our imagination? Can we not do it? If little Israel can do it, can we not do it? You captains of industry here, can you not initiate it? If you think it is impossible, can you not do it within the context of SADC? And when SADC grows, can you do it in ECOWAS? And can you do it with COMESA and with the Maghreb and with East African community? Can it not be done? And must it be done during your lifetime, or must your satisfaction not be that you are the planter of the tree? And that another generation will water it, and another generation will prune it, and another generation will sit at its shade? Can't we see life as a relay race in which we play our parts and we celebrate when we all win? There is something to learn from China. There is also something to learn from Vietnam. Today, Vietnam produces more coffee and more tea than my country, Kenya, because they are moving in some direction. They have identified what the fundamentals are. Is there something to learn from Brazil? A country that we knew until 1975 was controlled by the war generals. Today, when you travel, there is a jet called Embraer, which is Brazilian. Tell me which African country has made a bicycle beyond assembly. Which one? The nearest is South Africa. Here we are assembling things like our children assemble toys. For how long will Africa remain physically grown but in economic diapers? These are critical questions, but I'm submitting to us that something good is beginning to happen in Africa. And this is why it used to be said, and there was this cliche, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And somebody said that we must be careful, is it the light of an oncoming train? No, it is not an oncoming train. It is true light, it is a new dawn, and you can begin to see it. I'm beginning to see it in Ethiopia. Within a period of 20 years, Ethiopia is now generating 10,000 megawatts of electricity. Then you can begin to talk about industrial development. Then you can begin to talk about industrial development because they now have an electric train from Addis Ababa to Djibouti. Then you are beginning to talk about attracting industry. But if you have 150 megawatts, which runs the Schiphol airport in the Netherlands, you can talk about industrialization until the cows come home. No industry will ever come. Ethiopia is moving in the right direction. I'm beginning to see Tanzania moving in the same direction. They have now piped gas And the gas is supplying power in Dar es Salaam is going to be piped through to Uganda and Tanzania, and Mozambique is also beginning to pipe that gas. You are beginning to talk industrialization. Ghana is beginning to move in the right direction. Angola, if they don't allow themselves, and I must say this, is beginning to move in the right direction. They have oil. They only have to harness it in a manner that will benefit the people of Angola. And in matters of governance, one can also begin to see certain movements in the right direction. In your country here, you have Sam Nujoma, alive and well. You had Ifikepunye Pohamba. You have Gainhope. This is right. So that you have men and women who know that leadership is a relay race. You have ticked one box. Tick the other boxes. In Botswana, in the neighborhood, they have also ticked that box. They had Sereseha, Ketumile Masire, Festus Mohai, Ian Kama. They have ticked that box. Election is no longer a life and death issue. Oh, Zimbabwe. Oh, Zimbabwe. That great man who accumulated so many historical credits has squandered all of them. Suffering from the prima donna syndrome. The belief by the top dancer that she must never leave the stage. No matter how good a dancer is, you must leave the stage. Shakespeare was right. We have our comings and goings. He had his coming, there is no going. And you can see how the country is paying for it. And when I talk about that, there is a legitimate question that Mugabe raised: land. A great teacher of mine used to say that land is the last colonial question which must be resolved. And I agree. But how do you resolve it? Is what is important. You must resolve it in a manner that is sensitive to the realities of the country and in a manner that does not disrupt production. If you don't, you will pay the consequences. Ghana is another country which has ticked the box. Jerry Rawlings is alive and well. President Mahama is alive and well. And Nana Akufo-Addo is now there. You are ticking the boxes. These are the positives that are beginning to take place in Africa. Beyond that, one can see South Africa is troubled, but it has institutions. In other words, I'm submitting to us that another thing that is very important is institutions. Occasionally, without undermining his freedom-fighting credentials, President Zuma will have his tantrum. Our major foundational problems, Africa must solve our leadership problem. Africa must solve our problem of value addition in the resources that she produces. Africa must build our institutions. Africa must create an environment where our young men and women are going to gain employment. Africa must break down the tariff and non-tariff barriers. Africa must deal with the visa situation. Africa must create an environment where our institutions are efficient. Africa can be great and Africa must be great, but Africa can only be great if we make the decision. Margaret Thatcher was right. You cannot get the things that require effort without effort. I'm submitting to us that this is the time for us to make effort. The wisdom of this occasion demands that I recognize that this was a breakfast meeting, not a brunch meeting. And for that reason, I conclude my presentation by saying, let us unleash the potential of this continent. This continent can and will be great, but not through proclamation, but through our effort. God bless.